The judge had already denied her guardianship. She was walking out of the courtroom, trying not to cry, until three small chairs scraped loudly behind her. The courtroom in Franklin County was quiet, in a way that felt heavy, like the air itself did not want to move or looked. Elara Whitfield stood at the front table, her hands pressed flat against the smooth wood, trying to steady herself. Judge Alastair Boone adjusted his glasses and looked down at the file one last time. His voice was calm, almost gentle, but it carried across the room with final weight. The petition for guardianship was denied due to financial instability and lack of immediate. The words did not sound real. They floated above her head like something meant for someone. Guardianship, insufficient stability. Case closed. Her lawyer gave her a short nod, already sliding papers back into his. He had warned her this could happen. The state wanted guarantee. A single woman with two part-time jobs and a small apartment did not look like a guarantee. It did not matter that her sister Maris had trusted her more. It did not matter that Elara had been the one at the hospital holding Maris's hand during those last quiet hours. What mattered was numbers and began to stand. The chairs moved softly. The sound of shoes on tile echoed as other families prepared. For them, life continued. For Elara, it felt like something had just ended. She swallowed hard and tried to breathe. If she cried now, it would be in front of strangers. She refused to let the courtroom see her break. She picked up her worn leather folder, the one she had carried to every appointment, every meeting, every required class. It suddenly felt heavier than before. This was supposed to be her second chance at family. After her divorce, after the quiet years of empty holidays, she had told herself she did not need to be chosen by a man to matter. But when Maris passed and left behind a little girl who needed someone steady, Elara felt purpose returning. She had promised herself she would stay, even if everyone else walked away. Now the system has walked away too. She stepped into the aisle, her heart beating so fast she could hear it in her ear. The exit doors looked farther than they had when she walked in that morning. Each step felt slow, unreal, like she was leaving something sacred behind. Then it happened. Three small chairs scraped sharply against the floor at the same time. The sound cut through the room like a crack of thunder. Conversation stopped. Even the clerk behind the desk looked up. Elara froze mid-step. She turned slowly, expecting to see a restless child being corrected by a tired parent. Instead, she saw something that made her chest tighten in a different way. In the second row, a tall man stood up. His shoulders were straight, but his expression was steady, almost protective. Grayson Vale. She recognized him immediately from the grief support downtown. He was the firefighter who always arrived 5 minutes early and left 5 minutes late. The widower who never spoke much but listened. Beside him, three boys stood in a perfect line. Callan, Rowan, Bennett, all 7 years old, all watching the front of the courtroom with serious faces far older than. The room felt smaller now. Judge Boone paused as he gathered his notes. He looked up, clearly surprised. His eyes moved from Grayson to the boys, then back again. "Is there something further?" the judge asked. Elara's mind raced. Why were they standing? They were not family. They were not part of the petition. They were simply people she had met during evenings when everyone sat in folding chairs and shared stories about loss. She had once helped Rowan fix a broken zipper. She had brought extra cookies one night when Callan mentioned liking chocolate chip. Small things, nothing that should matter here. Grayson placed one hand gently on Bennett's shoulder, as if grounding himself before speaking. His voice, when it came, was calm but firm. He requested permission to address the court. A low murmur spread across the room. This was not normal procedure. Hearings ended. People left. Strangers did not stand up at the last second. Elara felt confused. Something else she did not dare to. Hope was dangerous. Hope had already embarrassed her once. Judge Boone leaned back in his chair. His expression shifted from routine authority to careful attention. He studied Grayson for a long moment, then glanced at the three boys standing tall beside him. The entire courtroom waited. Elara's heart began to pound again, but this time for a different reason. She did not know what Grayson was about to say. She did not know why his sons looked so certain, so unafraid. She only knew that for the first time since she was not the only one still standing. Judge Boone rested his hands on the bench and spoke slowly, his voice measured but curious. This hearing, pausing just long enough to shift the air in the room, may not be over. The judge's words hung in the air as every eye turned toward Grayson Vale, and Elara realized her story might not be yet. She was always the one who stayed, even when everyone else walked away. Long before the courtroom rejection, before Judge Boone's calm voice closed her case, Elara Whitfield had already learned what it meant to be the last one standing. The day her sister Maris passed away, the hospital hallway felt cold and too bright. Relatives speaking in soft, worried tones, promising support. But as the days turned into weeks, those same relatives slowly stepped back. Grief was heavy, and responsibility was heavier. When the question of guardianship came up for Maris's little daughter, excuses arrived quickly. Some said they were too old, some said their homes were too small, others said they could not afford another child. Elara listened to every reason without arguing. She had heard enough leaving in her life to recognize the sound of it. She did not make speeches. She simply said she would take the child. The 5 she was working, 2 low-paying jobs in Columbus, Ohio. In the mornings, she worked at a local bakery, standing for hours with tired feet but steady hands. She stocked shelves at a small grocery store near her apartment. The pay was enough to survive, not enough to impress a courtroom. Her apartment was small, with thin walls and old carpet, but it was clean. She kept a second bedroom ready even before she filed the paperwork. A simple bed, soft sheets, and a lamp shaped like a small star waited quietly in that. She wanted the child to feel wanted from the first. Her marriage had ended 3 years earlier. After many doctor visits and quiet talks about infertility, her husband had grown distant. He did not yell or slam doors. He simply left one morning with 2 suitcases and a note that said he needed a different future. Elara had folded the note and placed it in a drawer, not because she wanted to, but because throwing it away felt like admitting she had been easy. That divorce did not make headlines, but it shaped her deeply. It taught her how loneliness can sit beside you at dinner and sleep next to you at night. When Mary's died, Elara did not see guardianship as a burden. She saw it as purpose. She believed that maybe this was how life chose her back. Maybe she was not meant to give birth, but she could still give stability. She filed the petition knowing the court would question her finances. She gathered pay stubs, rental agreements, character references, and letters from neighbors. She attended required parenting workshops on her only free weekends. At night, after long shifts, she sat at her small kitchen table reading about family law in Ohio. She highlighted sections she barely understood and searched online forums for advice. She refused to let confusion stop her. During the first review hearing, the court asked about her income. During the second, they asked about emergency savings. During the third, they asked who would help if she became sick. Each question was practical, but each one also felt personal. It was as if the system was asking her to prove she would not leave. She wanted to say that leaving was the one thing her loneliness began to feel physical. It showed up as tight shoulders, restless sleep, and long silences in her apartment. Sometimes she would sit in the prepared bedroom and imagine a child's laughter filling the space. The quiet afterward felt even louder. Still, she did not withdraw. She kept showing up to hearings. She kept showing up to work. She kept showing up for a child who was not yet allowed to call her anything. On Wednesday nights, she attended a grief group at a local community. At first, she went because she thought it would look proof that says he was emotionally responsible. But over time, it became something. She sat in a circle of metal chairs with strangers who understood loss without did not talk much. She listened. When someone cried, she handed them tissues. When the meeting ended, she stayed behind to stack chairs and wipe down tables. Helping quietly felt natural to her. In that room, she met other single parents who were trying to hold their families together. She noticed how hard they fought to stay strong for their children. Watching them reminded her that resilience was not loud. Choosing to come back next thing had changed. She did not realize that someone else in that circle was watching her. She did not notice how a widowed father across the room paid attention to the way she always made. She did not see how 3 young boys observed her gentle strength and remembered it. Elara believed she was invisible. She believed she was simply the woman who stayed behind after everyone else walked out. She did not know that staying had already begun to change something. Across that circle of folding, someone had quietly decided that Elara Whitfield was not meant to stand alone. He had already buried one love, refused to let his children grow up without hope. 7 years before that courtroom morning, Grayson Vale stood in a hospital hallway, holding 3 tiny hospital bracelets in his hand. Each one carried the name-born son, Callan, Rowan, Bennett. His wife had smiled when she first heard their cries, but complications came fast and without warning. By sunrise, Grayson was no longer just a husband. He was a widower and a father of 3. The world did not pause to let him adjust. It simply handed him 3 lives and expected him to stand. Grayson worked as a firefighter in Columbus, Ohio. His job demanded strength, quick thinking, and long shifts that often ran into the night. But nothing tested him like coming home to 3 at different hours. who cried at different times, and who had no mother waiting to comfort them. Many people suggested he move in with relatives. Others gently hinted that he would remarry quickly. They assumed he would need someone to replace what he had lost. Grayson listened politely, but he did not search for a he chose instead to become both anchor and shelter for his. The early years were not graceful. He learned how to braid tiny hair for school, even though his fingers were built for heavy tools. He memorized pediatric appointments and bedtime stories. After 24-hour shifts at the station, he would come home tired, but alert, refusing to let exhaustion steal patience from his boys. He packed lunches before sunrise and stayed up late washing tiny uniforms for preschool. He missed adult conversations, missed quiet evenings, but he never missed a school performance or a parent meeting. The boys grew up watching their father stay. When classmates talked about both parents at home, Callan, Rowan, and Bennett spoke calmly about their dad. They did not carry anger. They carried understanding. Grayson never spoke badly about the past. He told them their mother loved them deeply and that love does not disappear. That steady message shaped them. It made them emotionally aware beyond their age. They noticed when someone in a room felt left out. They noticed when an adult smiled, but their eyes looked tired. On Wednesday nights, Grayson attended a grief support group at a local community center. At first, he joined, needed a space where he did not have to be strong all the time. He would sit while the boys colored quietly at a small table in the corner. That was where he first saw Alara Whitfield. She did not try to draw attention to her. She listened more. When someone struggled to find words, she nodded gently, giving them time. When the meeting ended, she always stayed behind to stack chairs and wipe tables. As if service was healing, Grayson noticed small details. He noticed how she carried a folder filled, always organized. He noticed the careful way she spoke about her late sister, as if protecting her memory from being missed. He saw how she never complained about her long work hours. There was quiet resilience in her posture. It was not dramatic or loud, but it was steady. His sons noticed too. Callan once whispered that Lara smiled like. Rowan said she listened better than most grown-ups. Bennett liked that she never treated them as fragile just because they lost their mother. She spoke to them directly, asking about school and hobbies as if their answers mattered. Over time, the boys began to sit closer to her. She would sometimes bring extra cookies or small coloring books, never making a big deal about it. Grayson saw how easily she fit into their not as a replacement for anything, but as someone who understood loss without letting it define her. Still, he kept his distance emotionally. He respected her space and focused on raising his sons. Staying for his children had always been his first promise. When he learned about her guardianship, he paid attention. He heard from another member of the group that she was fighting to care for her late sister's daughter. He admired her courage but assumed the system would handle it. He did not think he had a role to play. On the morning of the hearing, he took the boys to school as usual, but they asked questions about Miss Alara. They had overheard adults talking about the possibility. Their faces were serious in a way that made him pause. They did not like the idea of someone who always stayed home. That afternoon, instead of returning straight home after school, Grayson drove to the courthouse with his son sitting quietly in the back seat. He told himself he was only there to observe, to support from a distance. He did not expect to stand. He did not expect to stand. He did not expect to stand. But as he watched the judge dismiss her petition and saw Alara's shoulders lower under the weight of public rejection, something inside him shifted. He had taught his sons that family is built by those who stay. Now he had to decide if he believed that lesson himself. That morning, his sons had made a request that would force him to choose between standing quietly or standing up. Sometimes children see what adults are too afraid to admit. The morning of the hearing began like any other weekday in the Vale household, but something in the air felt different. The kitchen smelled like toast and coffee, and the winter light slipped softly through the blinds. Grayson Vale stood at the counter, scrolling through it on his phone. His jaw tightened slightly as he read the reminder about Alara Whitfield's guardianship. He did not notice the three quiet boys being more closely than usual. Callan sat at the table, tying his sneakers, Rowan spoon into his mouth without looking down, and Bennett watched their father's face instead of his breakfast. Children, who grow up with one parent, learn to read small. They noticed the way their father exhaled slower than normal. They noticed how he stared at the screen longer than needed. Grayson spoke softly, mostly to himself, saying that today might be hard for Miss. He mentioned that the prem is Alara. He mentioned that the coat could deny her request because she lived alone and did not earn enough money. He did not think the boys understood the full, but they understood enough. Rowan asked why someone would say she was not enough. Callan wanted to know who decided what a family looked like. Bennett simply asked why no one was helping her. Grayson tried to explain that courts have rules. They look at income, housing, and stability. He told them that sometimes even because they do not fit the right boxes. The boys fell quiet, but their silence was not confused. It was thinking. On the drive to school, they spoke about the small things. Callan talked about the night his backpack strap broke at the support group, and how Alara fixed it with careful hands and a small sewing kit she carried in her bag. Rowan remembered how she brought extra cookies and pretended she had baked too many, even though she knew exactly how many children would be there. Bennett remembered how she once sat beside him when he felt sad about Mother's Day and told him that families are built by love, not by matching fate. To the boys, those moments mattered more than work. At school drop-off, instead of running toward the building right away, they lingered near the car. Callan spoke first, his voice steady but firm. He said that if Miss Alara always stayed to help others, someone should stay for her. Rowan added that maybe adults forget that family does not have to match to be. Bennett said that if their mom were alive, she would help someone like Miss Alara. Those words stayed with Grayson long after the school closed behind them. He had built his life around resilience. He believed in staying when things were hard. He believed in showing up for his sons no matter how tired he felt. But he had never considered stepping into someone else's legal fight that all looked. He respected boundaries. He assumed Alara would not want interference. Yet his sons were not speaking. They were speaking from recognition. They saw strength in her. When school ended that afternoon, the boys climbed into the truck, carrying something folded carefully, but it was a stack of white papers with crayon drawings. On the top page, written in uneven but proud letters, were the words, "Families don't have to match." The pictures showed 5 stick figures, one tall man, 3 small boys, and one woman with long hair standing beside them. The figures were different colors, but they were connected. Grayson felt something shift inside him. His sons were not asking for a new mother. They were asking to stand beside someone who had always stood quietly for their innocence carried truth without fear of embarrassment. They believed kindness mattered more than status. He realized that teaching them about staying more than status, it meant action. Instead of driving home, he turned toward the courthouse. The boys sat straighter in their seats, holding their drawings carefully, as if they were official documents. Grayson told himself he would only observe. He would not interfere unless the moment demanded it. But deep down, he knew he was already making a choice. Inside the courtroom, they sat in the second row. The boys behaved with unusual stillness, sensing the importance of the place. They watched as the judge reviewed files and as I stood alone at the front table. They listened when the thing came down, denying her petition. They saw her shoulders drop. They saw the quiet heartbreak she tried to hide. Something inside them refused to accept that ending. As people began to stand and gather their belongings, Callan looked at his brothers. Rowan nodded slightly. Bennett tightened his grip. They did not ask permission. They simply acted on what felt right. When their chairs scraped loudly against the floor, the sound cut through the courtroom. Like a clear signal, Grayson felt his pulse quicken, but he did not tell them to sit. He understood in that second that courage does not always wait. As the judge declared the case closed, one small voice refused to sit back down. In a room where status mattered, kindness instead. The courtroom had already begun to empty when Grayson Vale cleared his throat and asked for permission. The sound was not loud, but it carried weight. Judge Alistair Boone paused, his hand resting on the stack of papers he had just closed. The clerk looked confused. This was not how hearings usually. Decisions were made. People left. Life moved on. But this time someone remained. Grayson's posture was straight, steady in the way it had been trained to be through years of emergency calls and long nights at the fire station. He was not dressed in a suit that showed wealth or status. He wore a clean button-down shirt and simple slacks. He did not look powerful. He looked certain. He spoke respectfully, addressing the court with calm control. He explained that he understood the court's concerns about financial stability and household support. He acknowledged that Alara Whitfield lived alone and worked 2 jobs. He did not challenge the judge's authority. Instead, he offered something different. He said he was a full-time firefighter with income and benefits. He owned a 3-bedroom home in a quiet neighborhood with space already filled with children's laughter. He explained that he had raised his triplet sons alone for 7 years and understood the responsibility of daily care. He did not speak dramatically. He spoke plainly, like a man describing facts. A soft murmur moved through the room as people realized what he was suggesting. Grayson stayed court Elara's guardianship. He offered to co-sign financial responsibility and provide documented proof of household stability. He made it clear that this was not charity. It was a partnership. He said no child should lose a willing guardian. The room fell into stunned silence. Elara felt as if the floor beneath her. She had prepared herself for rejection. not rescue. She turned slowly to look at him, her eyes wide with dismay. She had never asked him for help. She had never even imagined it. The idea that someone would stand publicly beside her felt almost too fragile to touch. Judge Boone leaned forward, studying Grayson carefully. He asked questions about legal responsibility and law. Grayson answered each one without hesitation. He spoke about structure, about creating a stable environment not only for his sons, but for any child who entered. He did not present himself as a hero. He presented himself as a hero. He presented himself as someone willing to stay. Then something small but powerful happened. Colin, Rowan, and Bennett stepped forward from their. They walked slowly toward the front, holding their drawings with careful hand. The colorful pages looked simple compared to legal documents, but they carried meaning. Callan handed one to the clerk. Rowan placed another on the edge of the bench. Bennett held him tightly until Grayson nodded. Then he passed it forward as well. Across the top of each drawing were uneven but proud words. Families don't have to match. The pictures showed 5 figures holding hands. The lines were imperfect, the colors bright and fearless. The message was clear in a way that did not require explanation. The boys stood beside their father without speaking. Their presence alone said what adults often struggle to express. The silence in the courtroom changed. It no longer felt heavy with finality. It felt suspended with possibility. Elara's throat tightened. For so long, she had been the one offering quiet support to others. She had been the extra pair of hands, the steady listener, the woman who stayed after meetings to clean up. She had never expected someone to step forward for her. In that moment, she felt something she felt chosen. This was not about romance. It was not about replacing anyone. It was about community standing where isolation had once ruled. It was about children recognizing kindness and refusing to let it disappear. Judge Boone remained silent for several long seconds. He looked at the drawings. He looked at the boys. He looked at the Laura, who stood trembling, not from fear, but from overwhelming emotion. Finally he spoke. He acknowledged that courts consider structure, income, and household stability, but he also noted that the law allows for shared guardianship of a child. He asked Grayson if he understood the seer of what he was offering. Grayson answered without doubt. He announced that he would call a brief recess to legal possibility of modifying the petition to include co-guardianship. A quiet wave of surprise moved. Nothing was decided yet. Nothing was guaranteed, but the ending had shifted. Elara felt tears gather in her eyes, not from weakness, but from relief that someone had stayed when it mattered most. For the first time since Maris's passing, she did not feel alone in the fight. As the judge stepped away to reconsider the case, Elara realized that her future now depended. It depended on whether someone truly meant the promise to stay. The hardest thing for a lonely heart is believing one will stay. The courthouse hallway felt colder than the courtroom. Elara Whitfield stood near a tall window, her hands wrapped tightly around her folder, as if it were the only solid thing left in her world. The murmur of other families filled the space, but their voices sounded distant. Judge Boone had called for recess, and now everything was paused in the space between rejection and possibility. She should have felt relief. Instead, she felt fear. Hope had always been the most dangerous emotion in her life. It lifted her up just high enough to make the fall hurt more. When her ex-husband once promised they would figure it out together, she had believed him. She remembered the night he packed quietly, folding his shirts with careful hands while she stood in the bedroom doorway. He had not yelled. He had not blamed her. He simply said he wanted a different kind of future, one with children of his own. The calm way he left hurt more than anger would have. It made her feel replaced. Standing in that hallway now, she felt that old fear rising again. What if this offer from Grayson Vale was only temporary kindness? What if he changed his mind when things became complicated? Shared guardianship was not a small promise. It meant years of responsibility, shared decisions, and legal commitment. She did not want to become another weight someone decided was too heavy. She heard footsteps behind her but did not turn right away. She knew who it was before she saw him. Grayson stopped a few feet away, giving her space instead of stepping too close. That simple act spoke more than any speech. He did not rush her. He did not overwhelm her with explanation. He simply stood there, steady and present. When she finally looked at him, her eyes searched his face for hesitation. She did not find any. She told him quietly that he did not owe her anything. She reminded him that courts were serious and that promises made inside them carried real consequences. Her voice did not accuse, it trembled with worry. She did not want to be. Grayson listened fully before responding. He did not speak in dramatic words. He did not try to convince her with grand promises. He simply said that staying had always been his choice. He had stayed for his sons when life turned upside down. He had stayed through sleepless nights and lonely holidays. This decision was not a sudden, it was a careful thought. He explained that his boys saw something real, something steady. He trusted their judgment because they had grown up learning the value of loyalty and kindness. He was not offering rescue. He was offering partnership. If she did not feel comfortable, he would step back. But if she believed in building something stable together for a child who needed them both, then he would stand beside her without walking away. His calm tone softened something inside her. A few steps away, Callan and Rowan sat quietly on their legs swinging slightly but their eyes serious. Bennett walked closer and stopped beside Alara. He did not speak at first. He simply slipped his small hand into her. The touch was gentle and warm. Alara looked down at him, surprised by how natural it felt. He did not squeeze tightly or demand attention. He just held on as if reminding her that she was not alone. That simple gesture broke something open inside her. For years she had trained herself not to expect anyone to stay. She had built strong walls made of independence and quiet endurance. But now a child was standing beside her without fear of what others. His trust was simple and pure. She realized that hope did not always mean waiting for someone to choose you first. Sometimes it meant allowing yourself to accept being chosen. Her breathing slowed. The hallway did not feel it. She imagined what shared dinners might look like. She imagined laughter mixing with responsibility. She imagined not coming home to an empty apartment after work. The picture felt unfamiliar, but not impossible. Grayson remained steady, not pushing, not retreating. His presence was not loud, it was reliable. For the first time in a long time, Alara allowed herself to consider a future more than survival. It included the community. It included a chosen family. It included staying even when life felt uncertain. A court officer stepped into the hallway and announced that the judge was ready. Alara's heart began to race again. It carried fragile hope. She squeezed Bennett's hand gently before. Grayson met her eyes one more time, a silent promise passing between them. They walked back toward the courtroom together. As they stepped inside and the judge prepared to speak, Alara knew the next few minutes would decide whether hope would finally stay or walk away again. Sometimes justice is not about law. It's about who is willing to stay. When Judge Alistair Boone returned to the courtroom, the air shifted again. Everyone stood as, but this time the silence felt different. It was not heavy like before. It was waiting. Ella Ritfield stood beside Grayson Vale, her hands steady at her sides, though her heart beat fast enough to echo in hers. Callan, Rowan, and Bennett sat together in the front row, their drawings now resting on the clerk's desk as quiet witnesses to what had just happened. Judge Boone adjusted his glasses and looked directly at both adults before him. He began by acknowledging the unusual nature of the request. Courts rely on structure, documentation, and proof of stability, but they also exist to protect the best interest of a child. He spoke clearly, making sure every word carried weight. He said that what he had witnessed was not interference it was the community stepping forward. He recognized Grayson's documented homeownership and consistent employment as a firefighter. He owed the testimony of character references already submitted in Alara's file. He spoke about the value of emotional support, in addition to financial stability. For the first time that day, Alara felt seen not as a problem to solve, but as a person willing to stay. Judge Boone stated that the court would approve a modified petition granting shared guardianship. Alara Whitfield would remain the primary guardian of her late sister's daughter, and Grayson Vale would legally share responsibility as co-guardian, providing household stability and documented. The words settled slowly, as if the room needed a moment. Alara's breath caught in her throat. For months, she had carried fear like a shadow behind. She had prepared herself for loss, told herself she would accept it quietly if. Now relief rose so quickly inside her that it felt almost overwhelming. She pressed her lips together, trying to stay composed, but tears slipped down anyway. They were not tears of weakness, they were tears of relief. Across the room, Callan nudged Rowan gently, and Bennett smiled in a way that showed both pride and sympathy. They did not cheer. They did not speak out of turn, but their faces shone with quiet victory. They had believed a family could be chosen, and now the court had agreed. Grayson stood steady beside Alara. His posture remained calm, but his eyes softened. He understood what this moment meant. It was not about recognition or praise. It was about commitment becoming real. He had offered to stay, and now the law acknowledged that promise. He glanced briefly at his sons, giving them a look that said he was proud of them too. Their empathy had started this. Their courage had pushed him forward. Judge Boone closed the file and offered a final statement. He said that families are not defined only by biology but by responsibility. He reminded the courtroom that stability comes from people who choose to show up every day. Then he dismissed the case, this time not with finality, but with resolution. As people began to gather their belongings again, the atmosphere felt warmer. A few strangers smiled softly at Alara as they passed. The clerk handed her a copy of the updated order. The paper felt lighter than the folder she had carried for months. It no longer held only effort. It held the outcome. Callan, Rowan, and Bennett walked toward her without hesitation. Bennett reached her first and wrapped his arms gently around her waist. Rowan and Callan followed, their small shoulders pressing close. Elor bent down and embraced them carefully, aware that this moment would stay with her for years. She had walked into that building believing she might leave alone. She was walking out recognized, supported, and chosen. Grayson placed a steady hand on her shoulder, not claiming space, but sharing it. There was no dramatic celebration, no loud declarations, just a quiet understanding that something important had begun. Hope-driven redemption did not arrive with fireworks. It arrived with signatures, steady voices, and children brave enough to believe in connection. As they stepped outside the courthouse together, the late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the steps. The air felt different, lighter somehow. Hilara paused for a moment, taking in. She noticed how naturally she walked beside the Vale family, not behind them, not separate, beside them. She realized that loneliness had shaped her, but it did not have to define her future. Staying had finally been anyone else staying back. Grayson looked at her briefly, not with expectation, but with respect. The boys stood between them, talking quietly about what they would eat for dinner, already planning as if this new structure had looked. Ways exist. Something subtle shifted in that sunlight. Not romance, not certainty, but the beginning of trust. As they walked down the courthouse steps together, Elara sensed that this new definition of family was only the first chapter of something even greater. She walked into court alone, but she walked out. Months passed, and what began as a legal agreement slowly turned into something and steadier. The paperwork was signed, the schedules were, and life settled into a new rhythm that felt both unfamiliar and natural at the same time. Ella Whitfield no longer ended in a silent apartment. Instead, her days blended into shared dinners at the Vale House, where the kitchen carried the sound of three boys talking over one another and the steady hum of something that felt like belonging. At first, she came over with careful steps. She helped with dishes, folded napkins, and asked polite questions about school, but the boys did not treat her. They handed her homework without hesitation, asked for her opinion on science projects, and saved her a seat at the table without being told. Callan liked reading his essays out loud to her. Rowan asked her to quiz him on spelling words. Bennett often leaned against her side while drawing, the most natural thing in the world. It was not forced, it was not dramatic, it was steady. Single-parent resilience shaped every corner of that home. Grayson continued his long shifts at the fire station, but now he returned to a house where responsibility. Alara learned the boys, their favorite breakfasts, and the small details. She attended parent meetings alongside Grayson, not as a replacement for but as an added layer of care. Teachers noticed the teamwork. Babers began to understand that this was not confusing. After several months, the decision was made quietly and thoughtfully. Elara moved into the larger Vale home. It was not about romance or rushing change. It was about stability and presence. Her old apartment had been full of survival. This new home became a symbol of shared strength. They rearranged rooms carefully. The boys helped carry her boxes inside, proud to show her where everything belonged. She kept her sister Maris's photo on a small shelf in the living room, honoring the past while building something new. The community watched at first with curiosity. Some people asked questions, trying to understand how a widowed father and a single woman could share guardianship without traditional labels. But over time, consistency answered those questions. The boys thrived. They showed up to school prepared. They laughed freely. They spoke about both adults and their home with equal respect. What mattered was not how the family started. What mattered was that it stayed steady. Grayson slowly opened parts of his heart he had kept guarded for years. He did not rush into declarations or promises. He understood loss too well to move quickly. Instead, he built trust in quiet ways. He left space for Elara to shape the home in her own style. He asked for her opinion before making decisions. He listened when she spoke about her fears and hopes. Their connection deepened through shared responsibility rather than dramatic romance. It was a bond formed through daily chores. Elara noticed how different this felt from her past marriage. There were no grand speeches about forever. There were small, consistent acts of staying. When she came home tired from work, dinner was already cooking. When Grayson worked late shifts, she made sure the boys' routine. They were not trying to impress each other. They were building something practical and lasting. Loneliness faded slowly. replaced by chosen belonging. Elara realized she no longer felt invisible. She felt included in decisions, included in laughter, included in quiet evenings on the couch, while the boys watched movies. She had not been assigned to this family by blood. She had been chosen by courage. One afternoon, nearly a year after that first hearing, Elara returned to the same courthouse. This time, she was not standing at the... She stood in the back row. A young single mother was facing her own guardianship battle, her hands shaking as she waited for a decision. Elara saw the same fear she once carried. Beside her stood Callan, Rowan, and Bennett, a little taller now, just as steady. They did not need to say anything. Their presence spoke loudly enough. Grayson stood her other side, not pushing forward, simply supporting. When the young mother turned around nervously, her eyes landed on the small group standing behind her. She saw 3 boys smiling gently and 2 adults standing shoulder to shoulder. She did not know their full story, but she saw hope in their posture. Elara understood in that moment. She had once believed she was the woman no one chose. Now she was part of the reason someone else felt less alone. Found family was not about replacing what was lost. It was about adding strength where it was. The hearing in front of them continued, and Elara placed a steady hand on the back of the bench in front of her. Remembering the day everything, she no longer feared hope. She lived inside it. As another parent glanced back and found support standing quietly behind her, Elara realized that staying might be the most powerful form of love in the world. If this story touched something in your heart, don't let it end here. Stories like this looked us that family isn't about who's assigned to us, it's about who chooses. Share this with someone who believes in second chances, and stay connected for more that restore hope. And now I want to ask you something. If you were in that courtroom, would you have stayed seated? Or would you have stood up for someone who felt completely alone? Let me know in the comments.